ditching us after church, I recommend you don't and join us for lunch afterwards because we always have lunch downstairs. And it's good to see some faces I haven't seen for a while. I'm especially excited about Molly and Hugh because they've grown so much. It's very exciting. Molly's like, I don't know who that lady is. But yeah, it's good to see Emily and Huon and Bronwyn's daughter, but I forgot her name, Michaela. It's nice to see you, and haven't seen Kim for a while, and Chris. It's really good. Alright, before I get started, I might just say a quick Dear Jesus, thank you for this day, and thank you for everyone here, and thank you for the opportunity to look at your word and talk about relationships and how to get to know each other and you a bit better. Please be with me and may the words that I speak be your words. I hope that these words will be comforting to those who are listening today. In Jesus' name, amen. I kind of regret only eating a banana for breakfast, but I was feeling a bit anxious. So here goes. I've tried to actually write this sermon numerous times, but it's always ended up feeling trite and like the topic is too enormous for me to condense in such a short amount of time. Even as I've been writing this particular version for the past couple of weeks, I've been consumed with anxiety about whether I'll be understood. Basically, how do I condense what I've learned from reading several books, countless conversations, self-examination, research, Bible studies, sermons, and therapy into one sermon? And that's an excellent question, and the answer is that it hasn't actually been possible. I've written things out, I've deleted things, I've messed around with them, stewed in them for hours, and finally prayed as well. And throughout this week, I've been getting little prompts here and there to make me feel like I'm kind of on the right track. I will need to preface this entire thing by telling you that I have zero professional experience. I haven't studied at university for years, nor do I profess to have all the answers. In fact, I felt a bit broken this week and like I have no answers. But what I do have is my life experience and an innate need to not see other people suffering. So what am I actually talking about here? Trauma and suffering. Yep, another light Sabbath topic for jolly old Sarah here, on theme for me. But after some experiences that I've had over the past few years especially, and knowing the people that I know and the experiences that they've had in their lives, I think it's something we need to be more open about. Over the past few years, there have been so many events that have been so truly distressing and awful that there was a while there where I thought, if one more thing happens, I'm probably finally going to lose it completely. I heard it referred to as a trauma storm a couple of days ago, and yes, that's what it can feel like sometimes. But I'm willing to bet if I or you picked anyone else in this room, they'd either be in the midst of a storm right now, or they've been through one at least once in their lives and they bear the scars. Just look at the world and everything that is happening in it. It's no wonder, right? Death, disease, heartbreak, war, famine, mental illness, the list goes on. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, and I'll be reading from the New Living Translation today because I felt like it says things in a nice way. So yes, Ephesians 6, verse 12 says, "For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places." The inescapable truth of our existence is that suffering exists, and it has done so since the fall. Theologians and philosophers have wrestled with the question of why it exists for millennia. A new word I learned recently while reading this book about suffering was theodicy, which is the defense of God's goodness and omnipotence in the view of the existence of evil. So this book goes through 7 different theodicies about why evil exists and what God's role, if any, is in it. We Seventh-day Adventists actually have a whole theodicy to ourselves, which is the Great Controversy. But it was interesting to me to realize that many people in my life, regardless of religion, denomination, or belief system, they had some mixture of a few of these as their beliefs as to why certain events happen in their lives and what the meaning of it all is. But the end of the book, which I'll read a piece from shortly, says regardless of the why, We need to learn how to deal with it. So I'm not actually going to talk about the why, because I will never be able to fully rationalize it. Today I'm going to talk about the how. So, suffering and the search for meaning, a final word. We have been talking about suffering as if suffering were something we could comprehend. We certainly want to, and to some extent we can, but we have also confronted the inescapable truth that suffering never makes perfect sense. It resists logical explanation, and all the philosophy and theology in the world will never answer all the questions it brings. Whether the suffering we encounter is theirs, mine or yours, it will always pose a challenge to faith and a threat to the meaning of our lives. But even if nothing makes perfect sense of suffering, and our attempts to fit it within a rational package never fully succeed, we can still respond to suffering resourcefully, and that is the essential message of this book. The intellectual challenges that suffering poses admit of no definitive resolution. As a philosophical exercise, no theodicy is perfectly satisfying. Nevertheless, a practical theodicy is within our reach. The mystery of suffering may never cease to challenge us, but we can live resourcefully in response to it. We can find hope and courage in the face of life's losses by bringing together fragments from the reflections and examples of others, from the assurances of religious faith and from our own experience. Suffering itself may not have meaning, but nothing can take away the meaning of our lives. So what is trauma? Trauma is an emotional response caused by severe distressing events, such as accidents, violence, sexual assault, terror, or sensory overload. Trauma is the inability to be present, and it keeps us stuck in the past. It is often the root cause of most of our unhappiness, whether it's what we'll term as the big T trauma and the small t trauma. I listened to a podcast some months ago talking about trauma and how to heal from it. This woman, Gabrielle Bernstein, had recently published a book about healing trauma, and she was discussing the book and how it came to be. This woman herself had to go through that journey herself to come to a full understanding of how to move through it. She said, "We are all running from trauma. We are all traumatized. We can't be alive in this world right now without experiencing trauma in some form. Some of us might have been brought up with totally secure attachment, with so much resilience and so much grace in our life, and you've experienced trauma, but maybe you've been able to move through it with more ease because you've had that safe, secure experience. But that doesn't mean you're unscathed. It doesn't mean that you've missed life lessons because even the subtle moments in time, someone tells you you're stupid, you're 6 years old, or you were in the best of environments growing up, but you were fat shamed by a friend. Those tiny moments that are seemingly insignificant dictate the rest of our lives. That's what we're running from. The bigger T, the trauma, child abuse, living with an alcoholic parent, whatever it might be. But regardless of how big or small the T is, there is something that needs to be undone. Because ultimately, that's what we're running from. And how are we running? We're running with drugs, alcohol, food, judgment, food, work, rage, control. They're the protector parts of us. We have moments in time where we disembody. We experience some kind of trauma and we check out. We say we never want to feel that shame or terror again. We just lock it up. Those are called exiled parts of us. They're often young parts. Then we build up all of these ways of protecting ourselves. It's the control, the drugs, addiction, workaholism, whatever it might be to protect ourselves from ever experiencing that pain again. We all have exiles and we all have protectors. In this podcast, the host says that it's interesting because these things that we think are protecting us are actually causing us more pain. They're deepening the wounds despite on the surface looking and feeling like we're protected. Sometimes we even disassociate because it's too scary to live in this world. Often the protected parts of us make us dissociate or check out, and we try some way to numb it out. I have to confess that I've been feeling a bit numb in the past few months since I had to put my old cat Bella down. And it might seem ridiculous to some people for me to be so devastated over a pet. But she was the one living thing in my world that I felt was my own thing to love, and she loved me in what has felt like a lonely existence for a long time. I had her for over 10 years. She was with me through 4 surgeries and 2 other hospital procedures. She was with me through heartache, a tough post-surgery recovery, 4 house moves, so many challenging moments, countless times, and since she's died, I haven't actually been able to cry. Even if you dissociate from a memory, it shows up in your body, in your digestion, muscle tension, sleep, relationships, and addiction. You may not have the claim of the memory, but the memory is in your nervous system. If you've read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, yes, no, somehow, yeah. Well, if you haven't, I recommend that you should read it because it's true. Your body does hold on to these things. I had a massage once when my neck was particularly bad, and the woman said that my body was telling her it was sad. And I was like, oh, okay. In fact, I've actually jarred my neck quite badly a couple of times just in the past 6 weeks. But most of us will come to church with an everything's okay mask because we're too afraid to be vulnerable within one another. I'm standing at the front today with such a mask. We do it because we're afraid of judgment, seeming to be too much, to be a downer, to be seen as catastrophizing, or that we shouldn't even have these problems if we're Christians. But sin and suffering doesn't discriminate. It affects everyone. However, onto the lighter end, God's given us all the ingredients we need to help heal these wounds. He's given us tools within our own bodies, as well as within our community to help each other. We were meant to exist together, not as individuals. I've read a lot of self-help books and memoirs. These are only a few of them. I've loaned out a couple to other people as well. I've read a lot. But do you know what the common theme amongst them is? It's spirituality and community. Do you know what a common theme of the Bible is? Spirituality and community. It's our relationship with God and our relationship with other people. Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 to 40, no, 36 to 40. If you want to turn there, or you can just listen to me rabble. Says, "Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses?" Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments." God created us for connection, both connection with our Creator and with each other. People can only start to feel those things on a personal level. Who here has ever sat in a room full of people and felt like they didn't belong? Yeah, same here. I'm looking at you, Dad. I was a missionary kid. I am also what's referred to as a third culture kid. Third culture kids, or third culture individuals, are people who were raised in a culture other than their parents' culture or the culture of the country of nationality, and also live in a different environment during a significant part of their child development years. When I was aged 2 to 7, my family lived in PNG while Dad, was working for ADRA. And if you want to hear some cool stories, have a chat with my dad. But my family was part of this amazing community. People were from everywhere, but we were close. Our school was filled with kids from all over the world. Everyone was different, but we all got along. We even went on a few wild trips to the Highlands. I once saw Dad nearly drive off what we'll loosely call a bridge into a gorge on one of those trips, and I had to be rescued out of the backseat of a ute that got stuck in a flooded river. It was the Markham River. Yeah. So it was a truly unique upbringing, but we had this great support system that we still have ties to this day. Then we came back to Australia, and everything was so different and weird, and we were weird. My sister and I like to joke to our mother that we looked like we were Amish when we came back to Australia. Here we were, two poor outsider girls wearing homemade clothes, coming to this tiny little country school where we didn't feel we'd fit in. And in a way, 20-something years later, I kind of still don't feel like I belong anywhere. We're all striving to find a community where we feel we belong, especially if we feel like we're exiles. Part of the reason I came and stayed at Red Hill years ago was because I felt like I meant something here. If we look at Jesus' time, who was Jesus reaching out to and what was he doing? He was reaching out to the exiles, the diseased, the traumatized, the unwell. There's a verse in Matthew chapter 9 and verse 36 where he says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless, like a sheep without a shepherd. people feel like they belonged. He made them feel safe and seen on a personal level. The woman at the well, the lepers, the blind, the possessed, prostitutes, tax collectors. There was no judgment, but he spent time with them and shared them with them in a way that made them feel whole again. But it's no good talking about it if we're not going to practice it, though, is it? So how are we going to practice God's love in action? How are we going to emulate Jesus' actions in making people feel whole again and share it with more people? A book I'm reading at the moment says it much better than I can, and it's quite technical, so excuse me, you and me, if you get a little bit lost, because it's taken me a long time to get through it. And where did Paolo go? Paolo actually gave this to me. So it's talking about becoming your unique self that God created you to be. So here we go. Quantum mechanics. Good stuff. Quantum mechanics, with its emphasis on the entangled nature of consciousness and the physical world, is about us in the world, not the world or us. Us in the world becomes key to the release of the perfect you. This is because in the humbling recognition that you can do something no one else can do as you operate in your perfect you, the role you play in others' lives is magnified. In one study, people who served others who were going through something experienced a 68% increase in healing compared to those who only got treatment for themselves. The research showed that helping others predicted reduced mortality, specifically by changing toxic stress to healthy stress. Many studies indicate that helping behaviour can buff the effects of stress on mental and physical health, specifically when people reach out in love with a positive attitude to other people. Furthermore, studies show that isolation has a negative impact on mental and physical health. We were made to interact with each other and help each other even when we are going through hard times. In essence, the principle of entanglement shows how the perfect you is not all about ourselves, but rather how we can get to know God better and to serve others. So like I said earlier, we were created for connection, not isolation. And I believe that God uses this within us to help other people. That's part of our purpose, and we each have a role to play. Like that passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 27, it says, "All of you together are Christ's body, and each of you is a part of it." By helping one another whilst we are also in the midst of a struggle, it's both beneficial to the other person as well as ourselves. We are building connections, not isolating ourselves. It's a beautiful thing. The book also says, entanglement demonstrates the profound impact our thinking, feeling, and choosing has, not just on ourselves, within our spirit, mind, and body, but also on each other and the world around us. So first things first, we need to have a look at ourselves. We could all use a bit of self-reflection and prayer. And I'm not just telling you this, I'm telling this to myself. God gave us the gift of consciousness, our mind. When we're in the midst of a storm, we're dysregulated and often frayed around the edges and often not acting in our best selves. Everything feels a little bit out of control. It's at these moments we need to turn to God. Psalm 6 in verse 2 says, "Have compassion on me, Lord, for I am weak. Heal me, Lord, for my bones are in agony." When I've been in these moments, I've had to be still and tell myself that this moment shall pass. Sometimes we're in the midst of it and it feels like nothing is going to get better, but then one day it starts to get easier. And then you can reflect and see that God has been alongside you all that time, and you can use that experience for the next time a trial comes. James chapter 1 and verse 12 says, "God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterward they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him." Sometimes, too, we feel extremely hurt by the actions of another person, sometimes willfully on that person's part. And this has been a hard lesson for me to learn, but this book also says, forgiveness is a primary example of entanglement in action. By not forgiving, we are staying entangled in someone's life, and everything they say or do is as real as though they were still in our lives hurting us. By forgiving, we disentangle ourselves from the toxic situation we have experienced, protect our spirits, and recreate a healthy entanglement where we are no longer affected by that person's bad choice. The notion of forgiveness is by far easier said than done. it's much easier to feel anger at the injustice of it all. Forgiveness takes time, and I will put my hand straight up and tell you that I'm still not that great at it. But the older I get and the more I look with compassion on other people and their life journeys, the more I realise that forgiveness, while difficult, is actually a weight to be lifted off our own shoulders. The book then says, we cannot control the events and circumstances of life, since everyone is free to make their own choices, even if they negatively impact us. We can, however, control our reactions to the events and circumstances of life through the choices we make. When we understand how we react, when we understand how we think, feel, and choose, we realise we can choose to control those reactions and ensure they are true to our wired for love, image-bearing design. In turn, we shape our world, bearing witness to the love of God. We truly begin to reflect, like a light on a hill, his magnificent image. I heard a cool analogy last Sabbath. A cell in a human body is a really complicated thing, but one mechanism that it has is that it needs salt in order for it to absorb water or hydration. So if we expand on this a little creatively, we're called the salt of the earth, and Jesus was called the living water. If we look at this miracle cell and think of it as someone who needs the living water of life, are we not in this world to be that salt bridge to help people receive Jesus? In that vein, the Great Commission was to make disciples. How are we going to do that if we don't help people heal, who come into our presence every day of our lives? This church isn't just for healing on the Sabbath. We, the church, are meant to share the good news of God's love in every moment. So how do we do that? One of my favourite verses, it's in Hebrews chapter 1 and verses 24 and 25. Says, let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works, and let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. So we need action, not just pity. And it's because you genuinely want to show God's love, not because you feel like you have an obligation to do the right thing. Matthew chapter 7 and verses 16 to 18 says, you can identify them by their fruit, that is, by the way they act. Can you pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? A good tree produces good fruit, and a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. So people will be attracted to you if you are bearing good fruits. If we are reflecting God's image, which we hope we do, we will be bearing the fruits of the Spirit, as they are in Galatians 5 verses 22 and 23. They are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So we'll start small. Choose one person you already have a relationship, or you can choose more if you're feeling up to it. Build a connection with that person. You're not doing it out of wanting to control that person or forcing them to do what you want. That's dictatorship. You're wanting what's best for that person, and that's love. Pray for them, find out how they need help, what they need support with, and if they need professional help, guide them towards that. I have a friend that either one of us will start our nearly daily conversations with, welfare check. That's just how we do it, welfare check. We've reached that point in our friendship where we dispense with the hellos and the how are yous because we know we can be vulnerable with each other. Tell the truth to the best of your ability and of where you're at. Be authentic with people. Finding commonality with people through shared experiences is a wondrous thing. I have friends at work who have similar health issues to me, and we share compassion with each other because we know what it's like to be in each other's shoes. Neither of my friends are religious as such, but they allow me to share with them. Follow through on your words with actions that match what you say. People can spot a hypocrite a mile off. If you tell a person, you can talk to me about anything, don't then turn around and then judge them for what they tell you. We're not here to judge, we're here to listen and to guide. So even while you're in the midst of a storm, you can help other people. Sometimes it's during those toughest moments where you can share about God's strength the most. Let people feel a tangible connection with God by sharing your experience with them, because spirituality or communion with God is also healing. And if that's a bit hard right now, take heart in this. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 10 says, "In his kindness, God called you to share in his eternal glory by means of Christ Jesus. So after you have suffered a little while, he will restore, support, and strengthen you, and he will place you on a firm foundation." And when you get to that firm foundation on the other side, share that too. It's the whole "there but by the grace of God" story, and I think we would all have a story like that we could share. I tell people to read the Psalms, and I've said many times before that the Psalms cover the whole range of emotions and experiences, everything from sorrow to joy. I will share two of my favourite verses from the Psalms with you. I actually have both of these hanging up beside my bed, having been blessed to have an artistic friend who made them for me some years ago. The first is Psalm 4 and verse 8. It says, "In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, will keep me safe." I am not a good sleeper, but I find it comforting to know that even when I am scared or have nightmares, that God is still watching over me. Sometimes during a nightmare, and I don't know if anyone else has experienced sleep paralysis, but it's terrifying, I'll be calling out to God to help me, and then I'll thankfully wake up to safety. I think also too, if you read the rest of this psalm, it's about even when it feels like the whole world is against you, God's there in that trial, watching over you. The second is Psalm 56 and verse 8. "You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book." I've cried a lot of tears in my life. I am a sensitive soul. When I feel acute anxiety, I actually feel it as a physical burning sensation in my neck from my ears right down to my chest, and my chest often feels quite tight, and it's hard to breathe. And that can feel like invisible pain to other people. But I take great comfort in knowing that God intimately knows what I'm experiencing, and in Jesus' experience on the cross, he felt all of that pain and more too. So God truly understands. I assure you he does. Before I finish today, I want to tell you about some amazing things that God equipped us with in our own bodies. So number one, our mind is separate from our brain, our consciousness, as I mentioned earlier. So we have free choice. God's given us the ability to reflect and actively choose how we are going to behave in life. Though we have what's called the negativity bias, where we focus on the bad things, we can train our brain to look at the positives. If we practice gratitude every day, we're actively rewiring the neural pathways in our brains to look for the positives. That's why I think this is a great verse. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8 says, "And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honourable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about these things that are excellent and worthy of praise." Number two, humour. I think God gave us a sense of humour. Laughter is good for you. It's good for your brain. I know my nephew Ezra likes to tell a good joke. He's like, "Don't look at me, Sarah." Okay, it's good for your brain. It increases oxygen supply to your organs, it soothes tension, it can relieve pain and improves your mood. It's contagious too. So I like to make people laugh, even if it's by telling stories about my own awkward experiences in life, or telling people about my new kitten and his antics, like when he has jumped into my toilet accidentally. So we need to look for wholesome opportunities to laugh, and there is laughter and joy to be found in many places. And three, we have this super interesting part of our body called the vagus nerve, stretching from our brains, down our necks and into our torsos, carrying information from our brains to our internal organs. Vagus in Latin means wandering, so this nerve is literally like a wanderer in our bodies, and is an integral part of our parasympathetic nervous system. This system is responsible for calming our internal organs after a stressful fight or flight response in our bodies. Sometimes our parasympathetic system gets a bit out of whack and dysregulated, and we can kind of get stuck in this fight or flight state. But again, God's given us tools to stimulate this nerve to get it regulated again. And one of these is singing or humming. The vibrations and rhythm of singing stimulates the vagus nerve, and our nervous system is signaled that everything is okay again. So isn't that cool? As a lover of music, this delights me no end that this gift of music that we've been given is not only a form of worship, but God's made it so it's of benefit to both him and us. So I think this is the perfect time for me to ask you to join me in regulating our nervous systems by singing our closing song. And this song is special to me because I think of it as a prayer for specific people in my life who I hope will be healed and whole